For those of you who've been following Transurban, obviously over the last little while, over the last sort of 2 or 3 years, we've had quite a strong run in terms of acquisitions and development activity. And effectively where we are now in each of our regions, in Melbourne, Sydney, Brisbane, and also in the United States, we have active development activity either in the construction or in negotiation phase with the government. Most significantly from a dollar perspective, obviously over the last, has been our entry into the Queensland market. Last year, so we've been in Queensland now for 18 months, and 18 months ago we closed on the Queensland Motorways transaction, a little over $7 billion acquisition of 5 of the 6 toll roads here in Brisbane, and we've got off to a really strong start there. Obviously it's a big cost-out integration story, and so far so good on that front. We're well ahead of our plans. The second element of that was the 6th and final toll road here in Brisbane, which we closed, or we announced to the market a week or so ago, and that was the $1.87 billion acquisition of Airport Link, with cost comes out at around the $2 billion mark. Those metrics are almost identical to the QML acquisition at about 28 times EBITDA, and while relative to some of the industrials that you look at, that seems a big number, in the infrastructure space at the moment, that is actually pretty good compared to a lot of the transactions going around sort of in the mid-30s. Airport Link, for those of you here in Brisbane especially, has been much maligned in its history to date. Obviously originally forecast for sort of much higher traffic than what it's ultimately achieved, but like all these things, maybe it's the second owner of these things that we believe makes money. So it's currently at about 55,000 vehicles a day operating at. That translates to about $100 million a year revenue and the current cost base of about $30 million a year. We believe that we can obviously make great strides in that cost base with the amalgamation of, in particular, the back office. It has a very costly back office for what is only about 25,000 dedicated customers here in Brisbane. That translates to our broader network where we manage 1.35 million customers. So it's sort of taking out the cost base that services a very small customer base. The other one is obviously just in terms of the operating costs and the consistency and amalgamation with our broader Queensland market. So we're very confident with this transaction. It's absolutely middle of the fairway for us. We've flagged it for a long time to our investors, and certainly Jess and I and others, and our CEO Scott Charlton and Adam Watson, our CFO, in dealing with all our investors over the last couple of weeks through the rights issue. Certainly no surprises and strong support from our large institutional investors. And so we are through the institutional component of the capital raising, the little over $1 billion capital raising, and we are moving through to the finalisation of the retail component right now. The broader network, just really quickly, in the Sydney market, we're completing, we're probably the big ticket item is the North Connects project, a little under $3 billion tunnel in Sydney, and that's in construction now and going really well. In the US, we've got, for those of you who follow the stock, a much more dynamic, sort of innovative sort of side to our business with a dynamically priced tolling on our I-95 and 495 Capital Beltway project. They are now, after long gestation periods in the development, up and running and cash producing and going very well. And in fact, the government is wanting us to explore extensions to those networks, which we're very keen to do so on an exclusive negotiated basis. And then finally, probably the really big ticket item is in Melbourne. During the week we announced we moved through to exclusive negotiations with the Victorian State Government on the $5.5 billion Western Distributor, which would be effectively a second crossing of Victoria's worst congestion point, which is the Westgate Bridge. So all up, lots of activity. And what I'd highlight is probably the vast majority of that in exclusive negotiations with our state partners using our unique elements of our network. And so lots of activity and strong cash flow going into FY16, calendar 16. Happy to take questions.
Yeah. Hi, thanks for the update. Just a question, or two things really. Firstly, you mentioned the cost out on Airport Link.
Yep.
Just wondering if you can put some quantum around that and what you expect to see. And also the Kingsford Smith upgrade and just how that's going to impact traffic on that.
Yeah, it's a really good question. Jess will kick me in the shins if I provide any forecasts, so I'm not allowed to do that. I'd love to. But the answer is, I think, look to the QML story. Over the last year, we've had quite significant cost outs. Probably that was the miss on the market when we first bought QML. I think they didn't realise how much costs we can take out of these things. But to put it in context, we've more than halved the employee base at QML since we arrived. There was over 400 employees there. We now have 160, and even more significant cost outs in regards to sort of overheads and back office systems and things like this. So very significant is what I'd say. The other question, KSD. So for those of you outside Brisbane, the main free competing route with Airport Link is Kingsford Smith Drive, and the council has just announced a significant upgrade to that facility. And so the simple answer is, over the next 5 years, we will benefit from that because of the construction impacts. Longer term, that will obviously take traffic away on a relative scale, and that has all been baked into our forecast. So the forecast and our analysis of the road is a little bit noisy over the next couple of years with Kingsford Smith Drive. ICB will also be worked on, so there's a little bit of choppiness around the asset, but then longer term, sort of from that 2020 steady state, it's sort of quite predictable from there. So near-term benefits from diversion onto our asset, longer-term diversion off our asset because of a better free competing route.
Wes, can you just talk about, I suppose, the benefits you can extract by owning and controlling each of the 6 concessions in Brisbane, just in terms of network development opportunities, pricing structures, and whether the fact that 3 of those concessions are with the Brisbane City Council and 3 of them with the state government, whether that creates any complications?
So in simple terms, we look at it as sort of from a people perspective. We've got 160, 170 people at QML. They've got 77 at Airport Link. There's clearly some cost outs there as we bring those 2 organisations together. Systems, when we arrived, QML had a SAP system. It had Oracle in terms of its back office, in terms of its finance. Every system that was possible was the opposite of what Transurban had. So it was Oracle versus SAP. It was this and was versus that, and you can imagine the overheads that come with that. So the consolidation of the technology suite has been significant, and then we're actually in the process of looking at bringing our proprietary tolling system to Brisbane. In Melbourne and Sydney, we operate on a platform that's known as Glide. We will now bring that to, over the next year or 2, we'll bring that to Brisbane, and what we see there is 1, much lower cost to operate, but 2, better toll capture. And so there is greater leakage in some of these other systems. For those of you paying tolls, that's not the greatest story for you, but here in Brisbane, but there is definitely better capture rates. But then you get on to the more interesting side of things, and that is the actual better, at the moment here in Brisbane, we've had a situation where, because of the individual ownership of assets, ridiculous situations where different signage on the Clem 7 relative to Airport Link, or we've just opened Legacy Way and all this sort of stuff. So you can actually treat the user experience, if you like, as a genuine network approach rather than the ridiculousness of different assets. And then finally, the big ticket, and certainly we're not here forecasting this today, but longer term, clearly there is capacity in the tunnels here in Brisbane, which we don't have in our other networks. Melbourne and Sydney, the issue is sort of congestion as opposed to the capacity. There is clearly the opportunity to have a broad discussion with government about some sort of network pricing type arrangements. I say this very tentatively, and no one should take away that we have a clear plan and we're going to implement it next month. But clearly there's a conversation to be had around better and more a continuous network approach, including pricing, and that's something that we'll explore over the next little while. So that's the benefits. In terms of the council versus government, look, yes, there is an extra layer of complications, too strong a term, but there is an extra layer of consideration probably to go through. But I point to, I think, if we do anything well, our company has proven an ability to work with governments and reach sort of mutually agreeable solutions, and I'm more than confident we can do that here.
On the Western Distributor, can you just talk to the opportunity there and potential cost out as well?
Well, Western Distributor is not so much a cost out story; it is a genuine development. So the greatest, the number one congestion point in the city of Melbourne, for those of you who travel there, is although the CityLink from the airport can sometimes feel congested, the greatest issue in the network is actually the pinch point of the Westgate Bridge coming from the west. So all the growth in Melbourne, I shouldn't say all, but the vast majority of the growth in Melbourne is to the western suburbs. We're seeing, rocket rocket fuel charged growth in Werribee, Melton, all these sort of western areas, Point Cook and these sort of things. Bedroom suburbs, as sort of the network planners talk about. And at the moment, they basically have to come across the Westgate Bridge to get into town, whether you're going to the southern end of town, the northern end of town, or whatever it may be. Effectively, what our Western Distributor proposal solves, and Nathan will be able to forward a map around probably, is effectively for those wanting to go to the northern end of the city, you now have a second bridge crossing. It's actually a tunnel and bridge that will take you direct, so there's no need to go to the southern end of the town and sort of rat run your way through the CBD. It's a much more elegant solution. The government has long talked about a second western connection, but it was probably unachievable in terms of the huge costs they were talking about for a very, very long tunnel. We've come in and basically used the existing Westgate Freeway, but solved the actual pinch point issue. And so it's less about a cost out issue and more about just genuinely capturing a greater and a new segment of the Melbourne market. We're in exclusive negotiations. The one thing we highlight to people is that this is a very large project and by definition then has the lead time in it. So we go into the next year or so on exclusive negotiations. The large part of the construction phase is sort of FY18 to FY22. So you're talking about sort of long lead times. The big ticket element of what we announced during the week was one of the ways we're going to fund it is the negotiation with the state is a 10-year concession extension on CityLink. CityLink is obviously, a real engine of our company, and to be able to move that concession agreement from 2035 out a decade is very significant for our company.
Well, it's probably a tough one to answer for you, and I'm probably, we're looking a couple of years out here, but
yep.
Given what's happened in technology and vehicles and where we're at, moving to driverless cars and whatnot, and vehicle connectivity, do you see that as a threat or a risk to toll roads?
Look,
a threat or an opportunity? Sorry.
Yeah. I'll go back a step. We, probably 2 years ago, about 15% of our staff were technology practitioners. Today, about 40% of our staff are technology practitioners, and a good percentage of those are actually on the forward-looking strategy type technology as opposed to just working on our back office. So the answer is it could be a threat, but we are treating it as an opportunity and we're going to do it as such. And probably the main headline for that, and the simpler way to think about it is with driverless cars, and look, they're here today. I mean, for someone who has a Tesla today, which one of our IT department drove into the car park the other day with one, so it made me realise we're paying them too much. He got a text message. He showed me he got a text message last Saturday morning saying that his car had a software upgrade and he could now have autonomous driving on motorway. So it's here today. You can actually drive on the Gateway motorway with effectively the Tesla being slightly automated. I think you've got to keep your hands on the wheels and all that sort of stuff. But so it's here today. The answer is that at a headline level, and the simplest way to think about it is without nose to tails occurring and things like that, we actually have a much greater potential for volume through. The greatest issue to congestion is not so much the massive incidents that occur on the network, but consistent sort of nose to tails and that sort of stuff. And as you all know, it always happens at 5:15 in the afternoon. So if we get a situation where we have much more automated vehicles and things like that, there is a real potential for greater volume. What we're trying to do is make sure that we are a facilitator of it rather than sort of a done buyer of it, if that's the term. And so we're partnering with a whole range of sort of tier one technology companies right across in the US and also here in Australia. We're piloting a user charge a study, and which includes sort of TomTom and a whole bunch of sort of the tier one technology companies that hopefully over the next few years we can actually be a conduit to this sort of vehicle and all that sort of stuff, as opposed to just sort of being a taker. The issue is not going to be technology; it's going to be policy, and what we're doing is trying to provide a guidance to government and an informed view as to how the government should actually take on this. The automated vehicles and things like that.
Any questions? One more from you.
Wes, I was just going to ask you about offshore ambitions. Those two projects in the US are going well by the sounds of it. Plenty of pension funds with plenty of money around the world, and governments under pressure. What are the ambitions of Transurban? Are there more opportunities offshore?
Yeah, look, the answer is in our existing networks at the moment. That's where our focus is, and not because we should just say that, and that's a nice thing to say. There's just a lot of opportunities in each of our networks at the moment. So once you have sort of the Western Distributor up and running, we're building North Connects, we've taken on Airport Link, and we've announced the Logan Enhancement Project here in Brisbane, which is a $450 million enhancement to the Logan Gateway interchange, which will result in increase to truck tolls. And then you go into DC. You know, we're a company, we're a $20 billion market cap company, but we only have about 1,000 employees. So the issue is more around focusing our human resources on the things that, and not extending ourselves too much. More broadly, if I answer more generally, you know, we have a pretty focused filter on sort of urban roads. So we don't like intercity, we like intra-city roads, which means it's much less impacted by, you know, the economic cycles. You really focus on the right demographics, so, you know, growing wealth and the need for it, so congestion that's existing. We won't sort of build it and they will come. We want to see existing congestion and how do we solve it. And then you actually overlay that with, most importantly, the sovereign risk. So what's the contract environment like in the cities we go to? When you actually put those three filters across what we look at, you know, we're not looking at every city in the world. You know, it's actually quite a defined, very specific thing. And what we've said is it's the eastern seaboard of Australia at the moment and a very select number of cities in the US. There are some distressed assets in the US that have come, but they probably have gone, as I say, pretty incredible multiples to some of the pension funds. If it's a pure cost of capital shootout, we won't win, and more to the point, we won't even compete. So it's got to have some development capability, some network applied that we can apply our core capabilities, which is this network management, development, application of our technology, and things like that. So we're not interested just for roads, individual roads. It's got to be the opportunity for a network, and that's what Virginia provided us with the Beltway, I-95 and other things. That's what Brisbane provided us. So it's a long way to answer. Never say never, but at the moment we've got more than enough in our key markets to do what we're doing.